"It's too big. It hurts," she moaned. Mafia boss brushed her tears and said, "You'll get used to me." The rain in Greyport did not wash the city clean. Instead, it seemed to press the grime deeper into the cracked pavement, turning the neon reflections of the struggling business district into blurred, oily smears of red and blue for 24-year-old Lena Cruz. The relentless downpour was just one more heavy thing pushing against her shoulders as she pushed open the back door of the Rusty Spoon Diner. Her shift had ended 15 minutes ago, but her feet still throbbed in rhythm with the headache pulsing behind her temples. She adjusted her backpack, which contained 2 heavy nursing textbooks and a stack of mail she had been too afraid to open for 3 days. She did not need to open the envelopes to know what they said. The logo in the upper left corner was always the same: Harborline Collections. Lena huddled into her thin coat, checking her phone. It was 11 at night. If she caught the next bus, she could be home by midnight, giving her exactly 5 hours of sleep before she had to wake up to check Diego's vitals and get him settled before her morning classes. Diego. The name was both her anchor and her terrifying vulnerability. Her younger brother was 19, a bright kid with a laugh that used to fill their small apartment until the sickness took the air out of his lungs. The surgery had been successful, but the cost was a hole so deep Lena could not see the bottom of it. The insurance had covered 60%, the remaining 40%, combined with the post-op medication and physical therapy, amounted to a debt that felt like a physical weight sitting on her chest. She stepped out into the alley, the metal door clanging shut behind her. She took 2 steps toward the street before a shadow detached itself from the brick wall. Lena stopped, her breath hitching. 2 men blocked the exit of the alley. They were not the usual desperate figures asking for change. These men wore leather jackets that cost more than her rent, and they stood with the casual arrogance of predators who knew the prey had nowhere to run. One of them stepped forward. He was thick-set, with a neck that disappeared into his collar and eyes that looked like wet stones. "Miss Cruz," the man said. His voice was gravel grinding on glass. "We were beginning to think you lived in that diner." Lena gripped the strap of her backpack until her knuckles turned white. She forced her voice to remain steady. "I paid the minimum balance last week. I have the receipt." The man chuckled. A dry, humorless sound. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The rain instantly began to spot the document. "That was on the old interest rate," he said, stepping closer. He shoved the paper toward her chest, forcing her to take it. Harborline adjusted its policies effective yesterday. "There is a surcharge for high-risk accounts. You are currently 3 months behind on the principal." Lena looked down at the paper. The numbers swam before her eyes. The monthly payment had nearly doubled. "I cannot pay this," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "I physically do not have this money. I am working double shifts. I am a student." The second man, who had been leaning against a dumpster, pushed himself off the wall. He was taller, wiry, with a toothpick rolling between his teeth. "That is not our problem, sweetheart," the second man said, "but we are reasonable guys. We are here to help you understand the urgency." Lena took a step back, her heel hitting a puddle. "I will call them tomorrow," she said, her voice trembling. "I will work something out. Please, just let me pass." She tried to sidestep the heavy man, but he moved faster than his size suggested. His hand shot out, clamping around her upper arm. His fingers dug deep into the soft flesh, hitting the bone. Lena cried out, a sharp sound of pain that was swallowed by the rain. "We are not done talking," the man snarled, his face inches from hers. She could smell stale tobacco and peppermint. "You have until Friday to bring the account current, $5,000. If you do not have cash, maybe we can discuss other forms of payment. There are plenty of ways a pretty girl can work off a debt." Panic flared hot and bright in Lena's chest. She struggled, twisting her arm, but his grip was like iron. "Let go of me," she shouted, swinging her free hand to push him away. He laughed, tightening his grip until she felt a bruise blooming beneath his fingers. He yanked her closer, off balance. "You need to learn some respect," he hissed. Suddenly, The alley was flooded with blinding white light. The roar of an engine cut through the sound of the rain, followed by the screech of tires on wet asphalt. A massive black SUV had pulled up to the mouth of the alley, blocking the exit completely. The headlights silhouetted the rain, turning the droplets into diamonds. The man holding Lena froze. He squinted into the light, his grip loosening just enough for Lena to wrench her arm free. She stumbled back against the brick wall, clutching her bicep, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The driver's side door of the SUV opened. A man stepped out. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply walked into the alley, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The air grew heavier, colder, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on Lena's arms stand up. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that was impeccably tailored, seemingly impervious to the weather. He held a black umbrella, but he did not seem to care if he got wet. His face was a mask of sharp angles and shadows, with dark hair swept back from a forehead that showed no lines of worry. He looked like a king walking among peasants. This was Adrian Vascari. Lena had never seen him in person, but everyone in Greyport knew the name. He owned half the waterfront. He owned the politicians. And rumor had it, he owned the shadows where things like Harborline Collections operated. The two debt collectors straightened up, their arrogance evaporating instantly. The heavy man who had grabbed Lena took a nervous step back, his hands held out in a placating gesture. "Mr. Vascari," the man stammered, We were just handling a delinquent account, standard procedure." Adrian stopped 3 feet away from them. He did not look at Lena. His eyes, dark as the deepest part of the ocean, were fixed on the heavy man. "Standard procedure," Adrian repeated. His voice was low, a smooth baritone that vibrated in the narrow space. It was not loud, yet it carried more threat than a scream. Since when does standard procedure involve physically assaulting a woman in a back alley? The collector swallowed hard. She was resisting. "Sir." "We just wanted to make sure she understood the terms." Adrian tilted his head slightly. He looked at the man with a detached curiosity, as if observing a bug he was about to crush. "I run a business, not a slaughterhouse," Adrian said softly. "Fear is a tool. Brutality is a weakness. And you are making me look weak." He took 1 step forward. The collector flinched. "Get in the car," Adrian ordered. "But sir, the collection—" "Get in the car." The command was absolute. The 2 men scrambled toward the SUV, nearly tripping over themselves to obey. They did not look back at Lena. Within seconds, they were inside the vehicle, the engine idling with a low rumble. Adrian Vascari did not move. He stood in the rain, the umbrella held perfectly straight. Finally. He turned his head and looked at Lena. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome, but in a way that felt dangerous, like looking at the edge of a knife. His eyes scanned her face, noting the wet hair plastered to her cheeks, the tremor in her hands, and the way she was clutching her arm. "Are you injured?" he asked. Lena shook her head, though her arm throbbed violently. "I am fine," she managed to say. "Thank you." He did not accept the dismissal. He closed the distance between them, moving with a predator's grace. He stopped just outside her personal space, respectful yet overwhelming. "Let me see," he said, nodding toward her arm. "It is nothing," Lena said, pressing her back against the wet bricks. "Just a bruise." Adrian sighed, a short sound of impatience. He shifted the umbrella so it covered her, shielding her from the rain, the sudden dryness, the scent of him. Expensive leather, rain, and something spicy like sandalwood enveloped her. "I do not ask twice." "Miss Cruz," he said quietly. She froze. He knew her name. Slowly, with shaking fingers, Lena rolled up the sleeve of her damp waitress uniform. The skin was already darkening. 4 angry red marks where the collector's fingers had dug in. Adrian looked at the marks. His jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek, the only sign of the anger that radiated off him in waves. He did not touch her, but his gaze felt like a caress and a burn all at once. "I do not like people touching what is not theirs," he murmured. It was almost to himself, but the words sent a shiver down Lena's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He looked up. meeting her eyes. The intensity of his gaze pinned her to the spot. "You owe Harborline $82,000, he stated. It was not a question. Lena felt the shame burn her cheeks. "It is for my brother. His surgery. I am paying what I can. It is not enough," Adrian said bluntly. "They will garnish your wages by next week. Then they will move to evict you. The interest alone is outpacing your income by 200%. You are drowning." Lena. Tears pricked her eyes. She hated him for saying it out loud. She hated that he knew. "I will figure it out," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Will you?" he asked. "Or will you end up in this alley again next month with a broken arm instead of a bruise?" Lena looked away, biting her lip to keep it from trembling. He was right. That was the terrifying truth. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket. Lena flinched, expecting a weapon, but he pulled out a sleek black business card. He held it out to her. "Verona," he said. "It is my club downtown. I need a hostess, someone who is smart, discreet, and can handle difficult people without causing a scene." Lena looked at the card. The letters were embossed in silver. "I am a nursing student," she said. "I cannot work at a strip club." A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips. It did not reach his eyes. "Verona is not a strip club. It is a high-end lounge. You will keep your clothes on. The pay is 3 times what you make here, plus tips. And if you work for me, your debt with Harborline gets frozen. No interest. You pay the principal directly to me, on a schedule that does not leave you starving." Lena stared at him. It sounded like a lifeline. It also sounded like a trap. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" Adrian studied her face, his eyes lingering on the pulse fluttering in her throat. "Because I dislike inefficiency," he said smoothly, "and because those men made a mistake tonight. I prefer to correct mistakes personally." He took her hand, placed the card in her palm, and closed her fingers over it. His skin was warm, his grip firm but careful. "Come to the club tomorrow night at 8. Ask for me, or do not, and take your chances with the collectors. It is your choice." He stepped back, taking the warmth and the shelter of the umbrella with him. Lena felt the cold rain hit her face again instantly. Adrian walked to the SUV, got into the driver's seat, and drove away without looking back. Lena stood alone in the dark alley, the silver card burning against her palm like a brand. The apartment was quiet when Lena got home. The hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic hiss of Diego's oxygen concentrator were the only sounds. She locked the door, sliding all 3 deadbolts into place, though she knew flimsy metal would not stop men like the ones in the alley. She walked into the small bedroom she shared with her brother. Diego was asleep, his face pale against the white pillowcase. He looked younger than 19. The scar from the surgery ran down his chest, hidden beneath his t-shirt, a reminder of how close she had come to losing him. Lena sat on the edge of her mattress, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. She placed the black business card on the nightstand next to the pile of red-letter bills, $82,000. If she said no to Adrian Vascari, she retained her pride. But pride would not pay for Diego's anti-rejection meds. Pride would not keep a roof over their heads when the eviction notice came. She looked at the bruise on her arm. It was turning a deep, ugly purple. She remembered the way the collector had looked at her. Other forms of payment. Then she remembered Adrian, the way the men had cowered before him, the way he had stood between her and the threat. A wall of charcoal wool and quiet power. "I do not like people touching what is not theirs." She reached out and brushed a strand of hair off Diego's forehead. He stirred, murmuring something in his sleep. "I promised," she whispered into the dark. "I promised Mom I would take care of you." She picked up the card again. The decision settled in her gut, heavy and cold as a stone. She was terrified of Adrian Vascari's world, but she was more terrified of a world where she could not protect her brother. Verona was a fortress of glass and dark stone in the center of the financial district. There was no neon sign, just a velvet rope and a large man in a tuxedo standing guard. When Lena arrived the next evening, she felt woefully out of place in her best interview outfit, a gray pencil skirt and a white blouse that she had ironed 3 times. The women waiting in line to get in wore dresses that cost more than her tuition. She approached the bouncer, her heart hammering. "I am here to see Mr. Viscari," she said. The bouncer looked her up and down, his expression bored. "Is he expecting you?" "He gave me a card," Lena said, producing it. The bouncer's demeanor changed instantly. He stepped aside, unhooking the velvet rope. "Right this way. Miss." He spoke into an earpiece, and moments later, a hostess with flawless makeup led Lena through the club. The interior was breathtaking. The lighting was low, amber and gold, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and polished mahogany. The air smelled of expensive scotch and perfume. Jazz music played softly, an undercurrent to the murmur of conversations. Men in suits sat in plush leather booths, and women in shimmering gowns laughed over cocktails. It was a different universe from the diner. It was beautiful, and it felt dangerous. Lena could see eyes watching her from the shadows, men who stood too still to be patrons. She was led to a heavy oak door at the top of a private staircase. The hostess knocked once, then opened it. "Mr. Viscari is expecting you." Lena stepped inside. The office was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. One wall was lined with books. In the center of the room sat a massive desk, and behind it sat Adrian. He was reading a document, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. The sight made him look deceptively academic, almost approachable. He looked up as the door clicked shut. "You came," he said. He took off the glasses and set them down. He was wearing a white dress shirt, the top button undone, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. It was less formal than the suit, but somehow more intimate. "I did not have much of a choice," Lena said, standing near the door. She clutched her purse in front of her like a shield. "There is always a choice," Adrian said. He stood up and walked around the desk. "But you made the smart one." He picked up a folder from the edge of the desk and held it out to her. "The contract," he said. "Standard employment agreement, confidentiality clause, debt consolidation addendum. Read it." Lena took the folder. She scanned the pages, her eyes widening at the salary figure. It was generous, suspiciously generous. "And the debt?" she asked, looking up at him. "Harborline has been instructed to transfer the account to a private holding company I control," Adrian explained. "You will pay 20% of your weekly earnings toward the principal. No interest. The harassment stops today." Lena looked at the paper, then at him. It felt like selling her soul, but the devil was offering her a life raft. She picked up the pen from his desk. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name. "Lena Cruz, done," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Adrian took the folder back. He checked the signature, then closed the file. "Welcome to Verona, Lena." He stepped closer. The space between them suddenly charged with that same electricity she had felt in the alley. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. He looked down at her arm. She was wearing a long-sleeved blouse, covering the bruise. "Does it hurt?" he asked softly. Lena flinched, instinctively reaching to cover the spot. "It is fine." "Let me see," he said. It was the same command as the night before, spoken with the same quiet authority. Lena hesitated, then slowly unbuttoned her cuff and pulled the fabric up. The bruise had blossomed into a dark violet and black mark, the shape of fingers clearly visible against her pale skin. It looked violent and ugly in the warm light of the office. Adrian stared at it. His expression did not change, but the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He reached out, and Lena held her breath. His fingers brushed the skin just below the bruise. His touch was shocking. His hands were large, rough-skinned, the hands of a man who knew violence, yet his touch was incredibly gentle. He traced the edge of the mark with his thumb, as if testing the weight of the pain she carried. Lena felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. She should pull away. She should be terrified. This man was a criminal kingpin, but his touch was anchoring, solid. He looked up, locking eyes with her. His gaze was dark, swirling with an emotion she could not place. Anger, yes, but also possessiveness. I handled the man who did this, Adrian said. His voice was a low rumble in his chest. Lena swallowed. Handled? He did not elaborate. He just kept his thumb resting on the pulse point of her wrist. She knew, without him saying it, that the man from the alley would never touch anyone again. They will not touch you again, Adrian murmured. No one touches what is under my protection. The promise hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Lena felt a strange sensation in her chest, a mix of fear and a sudden, overwhelming relief. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like she wasn't fighting the world alone. He released her arm and stepped back, breaking the spell. Go to the dressing room, he said, his voice returning to a businesslike clip. Maria has your uniform. You start tonight. 10 minutes later, Lena stood in front of a full-length mirror in the staff dressing room. The uniform was not what she had expected. It was a black dress, high-necked, long-sleeved, and knee-length. It was modest, elegant, and made of silk that felt like water against her skin. It was a dress that commanded respect, not a cheap outfit meant to showcase her body. She smoothed the fabric over her hips. She looked at her reflection. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun. Her makeup was darker, sharper. The exhausted girl from the diner was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she belonged in this world of shadows and gold. She touched the fabric of the sleeve, right over where the bruise lay hidden. She had signed the paper. She had taken the money. She had let the wolf into the house to chase away the coyotes. Lena took a deep breath. Squaring her shoulders, she stepped away from the mirror and walked toward the door, ready to step into Adrian Viscari's world. She knew it was dangerous. She knew it might destroy her, but as she remembered the heat of his fingers on her wrist, she realized the scariest part wasn't the danger. It was how safe she had felt when he touched her. The first week at Verona felt less like a job and more like an immersion into deep water where the pressure changed constantly. The club was a living, breathing entity, one that woke up when the sun went down and did not sleep until the gray light of dawn touched the harbor. Lena Cruz learned quickly that silence was a currency more valuable than gold in Adrian Viscari's world. Her nights were a blur of pulsing amber lights, the clinking of crystal tumblers, and the heavy scent of expensive cologne masking the metallic tang of danger. She moved through the VIP sections in her black silk dress, carrying trays of drinks that cost more than her monthly rent. She learned to blend into the velvet walls, to become a shadow that provided service without interrupting the hushed conversations happening in the booths. She began to recognize the hierarchy. There were the civilians, wealthy businessmen, politicians, and thrill seekers who came for the exclusivity. Then there were the men who did not pay for their drinks. They wore suits that were cut just a little wider at the shoulders, and they watched the exits rather than the stage. Lena realized within 3 days that the line between legitimate business and criminal enterprise was not just blurred, it was non-existent. It was all the same ecosystem. And Adrian Viscari was the sun around which every planet orbited. It was a Tuesday, usually a slower night, but a delegation of investors from the capital had arrived, filling the main lounge with loud laughter and cigar smoke. Lena was assigned to the upper tier, a semi-private area reserved for the highest spenders. One of the men, a bloated real estate tycoon named Mr. Sterling, had been drinking scotch for 3 hours straight. His face was flushed a deep, unhealthy red, and his voice carried over the low hum of the jazz band. Lena approached the table to clear the empty glasses. She moved efficiently, keeping her eyes down, adhering to the invisible rules of the club. Another round, sweetheart, Sterling slurred, waving a heavy hand, and make sure they do not water it down this time. Certainly, sir, Lena said, her voice polite and distant, as she reached across the table to retrieve a crystal tumbler. Sterling shifted unexpectedly. His elbow knocked into her tray. The balance tipped. A half-empty glass of water slid off the tray and landed squarely in Sterling's lap. The cold water soaked into his expensive gray trousers instantly. The table went silent. "You stupid little—" Sterling shouted, scrambling up from the leather booth. "I'm so sorry, sir." Lena gasped, grabbing a napkin. "It was an accident. I will get—" Sterling did not wait for her to finish. His hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. His grip was wet and clammy, but surprisingly strong. He yanked her forward hard enough that she stumbled, her hip colliding with the edge of the heavy oak table. A sharp pain shot up her side, making her flinch. "Look what you did," Sterling hissed, pulling her face down toward his. The smell of aged scotch and sour breath washed over her. "These are Italian silk. You have any idea what they cost? Please let go," Lena said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I will get the manager. We will pay for the dry cleaning." Dry cleaning? Sterling laughed, a wet, ugly sound. He tightened his grip, his fingers digging into the tendons of her wrist. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a crude whisper. "I think you can do better than dry cleaning. Maybe you can come under the table and dry it off yourself." Panic flared in Lena's chest, cold and sharp. She tried to pull back, but he jerked her harder, enjoying the fear in her eyes. "I said let go," she said, her voice shaking. "Or what? You think you are special because you wear the dress? You are just waitstaff. Now get down there and—" The air beside them suddenly vanished, replaced by a vacuum of terrifying cold. A hand, large and elegant, reached into the space between them. It did not grab Sterling. It simply rested on top of Sterling's wrist, the one holding Lena. The pressure must have been immense, because Sterling's eyes bulged, his mouth snapped shut, his fingers flew open involuntarily, releasing Lena as if he had been shocked by a live wire. Lena stumbled back, clutching her wrist, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Adrian Viscari stood there. He was not looking at Lena. He was looking at Sterling. Adrian's face was perfectly calm, wiped clean of any emotion, which made him look infinitely more terrifying than if he were shouting. He stood with his other hand casually in the pocket of his trousers, looking like he was discussing the weather. "Mr. Sterling," Adrian said. His voice was soft, barely a murmur, yet it cut through the noise of the club like a razor blade. "Viscari," Sterling stammered, his face draining of color. She spilled water on me. I was just—" Adrian tilted his head slightly. He picked up a napkin from the table and slowly wiped his own hand, as if he had touched something filthy. "You are a guest in my house," Adrian said, "and in my house. We have rules." Sterling swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "It was an accident. Adrian, I had a little too much. No harm done." Adrian finally looked at Lena. He scanned her face, then her wrist where red marks were already forming. He looked back at Sterling. "No harm done?" Adrian repeated. He took a step closer to the trembling man. He did not raise his voice. He leaned down, bringing his lips close to Sterling's ear, though the silence at the table was so profound that Lena heard every word. "You just disrespected the only person in this room who matters to me tonight," Adrian whispered. The blood drained completely from Sterling's face. He looked as if he might be sick. "I apologize." Sterling choked out. He looked at Lena, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "Miss, I apologize. Truly, I did not know." "Get out," Adrian said. Sterling did not hesitate. He scrambled out of the booth, knocking over his chair in his haste. He did not wait for his coat. He did not wait for his bill. He practically ran toward the exit, his associates trailing nervously behind him. The music seemed to start up again, the tension in the room dissipating as the threat left the building. Adrian turned to Lena. The cold mask dropped, replaced by a focused intensity. "My office," he said quietly. "Now." Lena followed him, her legs feeling like lead. She was shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. She expected a reprimand. She had caused a scene. She had humiliated a high-paying customer. They walked past the security team, up the private stairs, and into the dimly lit lounge adjacent to his office. It was a space few people ever saw, filled with dark leather furniture and the smell of old paper and cedar. "Sit," Adrian ordered, pointing to a plush armchair. Lena sat, keeping her back straight, gripping her hands in her lap to stop them from trembling. Adrian walked to a small bar in the corner. He poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. He walked back and held it out to her. "Drink," he said. Lena took the glass. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was warm, "I am sorry," she whispered, taking a sip. "The water was cool and clean. I did not mean to spill it. I tripped." Adrian leaned against the edge of the heavy mahogany desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He watched her with unreadable eyes. "I do not care about the water. Lena, I care that you did not signal security the moment he touched you. It happened so fast," she defended, her voice small, "and I did not want to cause trouble. I know he spends a lot of money here." Adrian let out a short, sharp breath. He pushed off the desk and walked toward her. He stopped just inside her personal space, towering over her chair. "Money is easy to replace," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Respect is not." He reached out. Lena flinched instinctively, a reflex from the violence she had just escaped. Adrian froze. His hand hovered in the air for a second, then continued slowly, carefully. He did not touch her face. Instead, he reached for a loose strand of dark hair that had fallen across her cheek during the struggle. With agonizing slowness, he tucked the hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed the sensitive skin of her jawline. The touch was electric. Lena forgot to breathe. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. Adrian was looking at her mouth. His gaze was heavy, darker than the shadows in the corners of the room. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the soap and sandalwood scent of him. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the two of them. The air was thick, heavy with things unsaid. She saw his pupils dilate. She saw the way his chest rose and fell with a controlled breath. He wanted to kiss her. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, and even more terrifying was the realization that she wanted him to. She leaned forward, just a fraction of an inch. Adrian's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He closed his eyes for a brief second, inhaling sharply, and then he stepped back. The distance between them felt like a chasm. "Go home, Lena," he said, his voice rough. "Take the back exit. My driver is waiting for you." He turned his back to her, walking toward the window to look out at the city rain. The restraint in his posture was palpable, like a coiled spring held back by sheer will. Lena stood up, her legs unsteady. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian did not turn around. He just gave a curt nod. Weeks bled into a month. The autumn turned colder, the wind off the ocean biting through the streets of Greyport. Lena became a fixture at Verona. She was no longer the nervous new girl. She moved with a quiet confidence, her eyes sharp, her movements precise. She learned to read the room the way Adrian did. She watched him constantly. She noticed how he never sat with his back to a door. She noticed how he commanded a room without ever raising his voice. A lift of a finger, a tilt of the head, a specific look, and his men moved instantly. It was a language of silence, and she was becoming fluent in it. At home, the dynamic was different. The money from the club had changed everything. Diego was sitting up in bed when she got home one morning, a color in his cheeks that had been absent for a year. The new medication was working. The crushing weight of the debt collectors was gone, replaced by the strange, structured payments she made to Adrian. "You are home late," Diego said, closing his book. Or early, depending on how you look at it. Double shift at the restaurant. Lena lied smoothly, hanging up her coat. They needed help with the inventory. Diego narrowed his eyes playfully. "That must be some restaurant." "Lee, you are wearing silk, and you are glowing." Lena paused, her hand on the kettle. "I am not glowing, I am sweating. It is hard work." Diego laughed. "No, it is a glow. You look alive. Someone there catching your eye. Maybe a sous chef, a wealthy patron." Lena felt a flush rise from her chest to her neck. She turned away, busying herself with making tea. "There is no one." "Diego, just work. You are a terrible liar," Diego teased gently. "But I am glad. You deserve to be happy. Lee, you deserve to have someone look out for you for a change." Lena gripped the edge of the counter. If only he knew who was looking out for her. If only he knew the cost. It happened on a Thursday night, just after closing. The club was nearly empty. The cleaning crew was starting to move through the lounge. Lena was behind the main bar, tallying the receipts for the night. Adrian was near the front entrance. speaking in low tones with Marco, his second in command. The sound shattered the air, a sharp, cracking pop that echoed like a whip. Gunshot. Before Lena's brain could process the noise, 3 more shots rang out in rapid succession. Pop, pop, pop. The front window of the club, a massive pane of frosted Art Deco glass, exploded inward. "Get down," someone screamed. Chaos erupted. Adrian's men moved with terrifying speed, drawing weapons from beneath their jackets and overturning tables for cover. The lights were cut instantly, plunging the room into darkness. Lena stood frozen behind the bar, her mind unable to connect the sounds with reality. Another shot hit the mirror behind the bar. Shards of glass rained down on her. She screamed, throwing her hands up to protect her face. She stumbled back, slipping on the wet floor mats. Her hand slammed down onto the counter to break her fall, landing directly on a jagged piece of the broken mirror. Pain sliced through her palm, hot and immediate. Stay down," she curled into a ball beneath the bar, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest. The air smelled of gunpowder and ozone. She could hear shouting, the squeal of tires peeling away outside, and the heavy boots of men running toward the door. "Lena?" The voice cut through the panic. "I am here," she choked out. Adrian was there in a second. He vaulted over the bar, landing silently beside her in the dark. He did not ask if she was okay. He grabbed her by her shoulders, his grip hard and grounding. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice tight. "No," she gasped, shaking uncontrollably. "My hand. I cut my hand." He grabbed her wrist, checking the wound in the dim light coming from the emergency exit sign. Blood was welling up dark and fast, dripping onto her uniform. "Come with me," he ordered. He hauled her to her feet. She tried to pull away, looking toward the main entrance where the men were shouting. "We have to—" "Do not look at them," Adrian said. "Look at me." He dragged her toward the back, past the kitchen, into a small, windowless supply office that doubled as a secure room. He kicked the door shut behind them and engaged the heavy deadbolt. The room was small, lit by a single fluorescent bulb that hummed overhead. It was stark and cold, but it was safe. "Sit," Adrian commanded, pointing to the desk. Lena hopped up onto the edge of the desk. She was shivering violently now, the shock setting in. Adrian went to a metal cabinet on the wall and pulled out a first aid kit. He moved with efficient, practiced speed. He snapped on a pair of latex gloves and turned back to her. "Give me your hand." Lena held it out. It was a mess of blood and dirt. She felt nausea roll in her stomach. Adrian took her hand. His touch was firm but surprisingly gentle. He used saline to wash the wound, his focus absolute. He did not call for a medic. He did not call for Marco. He did it himself. "This is going to sting," he warned quietly. He poured antiseptic over the cut. Lena hissed, jerking her hand back, tears springing to her eyes. "I know," he murmured. "I know, stay still." He held her steady, his thumb stroking the back of her uninjured hand in a slow, rhythmic circle, back and forth, back and forth. It was hypnotic. It grounded her in the present, pulling her out of the terror of the shattered glass. Lena watched him work. His face was set in lines of concentration. He was close, standing between her spread knees as she sat on the desk. She could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice sounded broken in the small room. Adrian paused, holding a strip of butterfly bandage. "Why what? Why is this happening? Who were they?" He finished applying the bandage and began wrapping gauze around her palm. "People who want what I have," he said simply. "It is the cost of doing business. Lena." He looked up then. His eyes were dark, but the anger in them was gone, replaced by something weary and raw. "I never wanted you to see this part," he said. He secured the bandage with tape. He stripped off the gloves and tossed them into the bin, but he did not step back. He stayed there, standing between her knees, his hands resting on the edge of the desk on either side of her hips, trapping her in his space. Lena looked at his hands. They were clean now, but she knew what they were capable of. She knew he had probably held a gun 10 minutes ago. "I was so scared," she admitted, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I froze. I did not know what to do." Adrian reached up with his thumbs. He wiped the tear away. His skin was rough against her cheek, but his touch was reverent. "When you are afraid, you look for me," he said intensely. "Do you understand? You do not look for the exit. You do not look for cover. You find me." Lena looked into his eyes. She felt the magnetic pull of him, stronger than gravity. She felt safe. In this tiny, sterile room, with a man who was the cause of the danger. She felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. She leaned forward. It was unconscious, a moth drawn to a flame. She wanted to rest her forehead against his shoulder. She wanted to wrap her arms around his neck and bury her face in his jacket. Her forehead brushed his lapel. She froze. The smell of him, smoke and rain and leather, filled her lungs. What was she doing? He was a mob boss. He was a criminal. He was dangerous. Lena pulled back sharply, shame flooding her face. She looked down at her bandaged hand. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not. I am just shaken up." Adrian did not move away. He stayed right where he was, his body a shield against the world outside the door. "You should not be ashamed of wanting to be safe." "Lena," he said quietly. He reached out and tilted her chin up until she was forced to look at him again. "And I will never let anything happen to you." That is a promise. Lena did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed in the dark apartment, listening to the rhythmic breathing of her brother in the next room. She held her bandaged hand against her chest, feeling the throb of the cut in time with her heartbeat. She replayed the scene in the office over and over, the way his knees had brushed against hers, the way his thumb had stroked her skin to calm her down, the way he had looked at her when he wiped her tears. She knew she should quit. She knew she should take Diego and run as far away from Grayport as the bus would take them. The glass shattering was a warning. Next time, it could be a bullet. But as she closed her eyes, she did not see the gunshots. She saw Adrian standing in the dark, shielding her. She hated herself for it. She hated that the monster under the bed was the only one who could make her feel safe enough to sleep. She realized then that the danger was not just the bullets or the rival gangs. The real danger was that her life before Adrian, the debt, the fear, the helplessness, had been a suffocating dead end, and Adrian, with his blood-stained hands and quiet promises, felt like the only way out. She rolled over, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was falling in love with the devil, and if the devil would catch her when she finally fell. The atmosphere inside Verona had changed. The amber lights still glowed, the jazz still played low and smooth, and the champagne still flowed into crystal flutes. But the air beneath the luxury had curdled. It tasted like copper and ozone, the scent of a storm that refused to break. Lena Cruz felt the shift in her bones. It was in the way the security team stood a little straighter, their hands hovering closer to their jackets. It was in the way the regular patrons glanced nervously at the door every time it opened. Adrian Vascari was at war. The enemy had a name now. Nico Moretti. He was a rival boss from the Southern District who had decided that the waterfront and the lucrative shipping lines Adrian controlled should belong to him. Moretti did not fight with honor. He fought like a jackal, nipping at the edges, testing for weakness. The threats were subtle, designed to unsettle rather than destroy, a bottle of expensive scotch left on a VIP table, shattered not by accident but with a hammer, the shards arranged in a mocking smile. A single 9mm bullet casing tucked into the envelope of the nightly receipts. Lena found the casing herself one Tuesday night. She stared at the brass cylinder resting on the white paper, her blood running cold. When she handed it to Marco, Adrian's second in command, his face had gone gray. He had snatched it away and told her to forget she had seen it. But Lena could not forget. She was watching Adrian fray at the edges. He was still the impeccable king of his domain, dressed in charcoal suits that cost more than a car. But the lines around his eyes were deepening. He spent hours in his office with the door locked. When he walked through the club, his gaze was a radar, sweeping for threats, calculating angles of fire. One evening, Lena was carrying a tray of untouched appetizers back to the kitchen. The hallway leading to the executive offices was empty, or so she thought. As she passed the slightly ajar door of the conference room, voices drifted out. "We cannot keep playing defense. Adrian, we need to strike." That was Marco. His voice was sharp, edged with frustration. "Not here," Adrian's voice replied. It was lower, controlled, but vibrating with a terrifying intensity. "We do not bring this war inside these walls. There are civilians here." "Civilians?" Marco scoffed. "Since when do you care about collateral damage? This is about her, isn't it?" Lena froze. The tray trembled in her hands. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Watch your tone." "Marco," Adrian warned. "No, you watch your blind spot," Marco shouted, the sound echoing in the corridor. "Moretti knows. Everyone knows. You are distracted. You are hesitating because you are afraid a stray bullet might find the waitress." Silence stretched out, thick and heavy. "Then maybe," Marco said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "you should not have made one of them your weakness." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. Weakness. She did not hear Adrian's response. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her legs moving mechanically. She set the tray down on the stainless steel counter, the clatter of china sounding miles away. She was the weakness. She was the crack in his armor. That night, after the last patron had left and the cleaning crew was buffing the floors. Lena did not go to the changing room. She marched straight up the stairs to Adrian's office. The security guard, a man named Enzo, moved to block her path. "Boss is busy. Miss Cruz," Enzo said apologetically. "Move, Enzo," Lena said. Her voice was not loud, but it held a steel she had not known she possessed. Enzo blinked, surprised by the fire in her eyes. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Lena pushed the heavy oak door open without knocking. Adrian was standing by the window, staring out at the rain-slicked city. He turned as she entered, his eyebrows drawing together in a frown. "Lena? You should have gone home an hour ago. My driver is waiting. Am I the reason people are going to die?" she asked. The question hung in the room, stripping away the pretense of business. Adrian went still. He looked at her, really looked at her, assessing the set of her jaw and the tremor in her hands that she was trying to hide. "Who have you been talking to?" he asked quietly. "I have ears." "Adrian, I heard Marco. He thinks I am a liability. He thinks you are weak because of me." Adrian walked toward his desk, his movements deliberate. "Marco talks too much. It is being handled." "Is it?" Lena demanded, stepping further into the room, because finding a bullet in the cash register does not feel like handled. It feels like a warning. She slammed her hand down on the edge of his desk. "You pulled me into this. You stood in that alley and offered me a way out, but you did not tell me the way out led through a minefield. You made me a target." Adrian's expression hardened. He placed his hands flat on the desk, leaning toward her until they were eye to eye. "I offered you a job," he snapped. "You signed the contract. You walked through that door because you needed the money. Do not rewrite history to suit your fear." "I am not afraid for me," Lena shouted back, the tears she had been holding back finally stinging her eyes. "I am afraid because I do not know where the line is anymore. I am afraid because I see you checking the exits every 5 minutes. I am afraid because—" She cut herself off, her breath hitching. "Because what?" Adrian pushed, his voice dropping, challenging her. "Because I do not sleep when you're not there," she cried out. The confession tore out of her, raw and humiliating. "I go home to that apartment and I stare at the door, waiting for it to be kicked in," she said, her voice shaking. "I come here every night not for the money anymore, but because when I hear your footsteps in the hall, I feel like the monsters stay away, and I hate it. I hate that I need you to feel safe." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the rain drumming against the glass. Adrian stared at her, his mask of control cracking. The anger drained out of his face, replaced by something that looked like devastation. He rounded the desk. He moved fast, but this time, Lena did not flinch. He stopped inches from her. He reached up and cupped her face in both of his hands. His palms were warm, rough, and trembling slightly with his thumbs. He gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Lena." He breathed. He looked at her as if she were the only source of light in a collapsing world. He hesitated, his eyes searching hers, giving her one last chance to pull away, to run, to save herself from him. She didn't move. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. Adrian made a low sound in his throat and crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was an impact. It was desperate and searing, pouring weeks of repressed fear, danger, and longing into a single point of contact. Lena gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to him. He groaned against her lips, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly off the floor to press her body against his. The kiss tasted of desperation and inevitability. It was a confession without words. "I am terrified. I need you. I cannot walk away." They broke apart, breathless, foreheads pressed together. Adrian's hands were tangled in her hair, holding her as if he expected the floor to open up beneath them. "I never wanted you to be afraid," he whispered roughly against her skin. "I only ever wanted you safe." "Then stop pushing me away," Lena whispered back. The shift was subtle, but everyone felt it. Adrian did not announce that Lena was his. He did not need to. It was in the way he stood closer to her when he spoke. It was in the way his most trusted men, Enzo and Luca, were suddenly assigned to floor duty whenever Lena was working, hovering in her periphery like guardian dogs. The staff began to whisper, "The boss's girl." It was a title that carried protection, but it also painted a target on her back. 3 days later, Adrian announced that Lena and Diego were moving. "The neighborhood is not safe," he said simply, handing her a set of keys. "There have been break-ins. I have a property in the West End. Secure building. Doorman, it is empty. Use it. It wasn't a request. The apartment was beautiful. It was on the 6th floor of a brick building that looked like a fortress. It had hardwood floors and a view of the harbor." Diego was ecstatic. He wheeled his oxygen tank over to the window, marveling at the sight of the boats. "Look at this place." "Lee," he exclaimed, "it is like a movie. Are you sure your boss is okay with this? This must cost a fortune." "It is part of the compensation package." Lena lied, her stomach twisting. She felt trapped. The apartment was a golden cage. She knew the doorman was on Adrian's payroll. She knew the car parked across the street was one of Adrian's. She was safer here than anywhere else, but she had never felt more owned. One evening, a week after the move, the buzzer rang. "It is security check," a voice said over the intercom. Lena opened the door to find Adrian standing in the hallway. He was wearing a leather jacket over a black t-shirt, looking less like a CEO and more like the street fighter he had once been. "I am checking the locks," he said. "Diego is asleep," Lena whispered, stepping out into the hallway and pulling the door almost shut. "He had a long day at the clinic." Adrian nodded. He did not move to check the locks. He just stood there, looking at her. She was wearing oversized sweatpants and a tank top, her hair messy. She felt exposed, yet he looked at her as if she were wearing a gown. "Is he improving?" Adrian asked quietly. "Yes. The new specialist you recommended. He is good. Diego walked 4 blocks today without the tank." "Good," Adrian said. "That is good." They stood too close. The fluorescent light of the hallway hummed above them. The air grew thick, heavy with the memory of the kiss in his office. Adrian reached out. He traced the line of her collarbone with his knuckle, his touch feather light. "You look tired," he murmured. "I am tired," Lena admitted, her voice trembling. "I am tired of looking over my shoulder. I am tired of lying to my brother." Adrian stepped closer, crowding her against the doorframe. His hand moved up to her neck, his thumb resting against her pulse. "I know," he said. He trailed his thumb up along her jawline, his eyes dark and hungry. "You have no idea what you have done to me, Lena," he whispered. "I cannot think straight. I look at the maps, and all I see is your face." Lena's breath hitched. She leaned into his hand, her eyes fluttering shut. "Then stop thinking," she whispered. "I am tired of pretending there is nothing between us." Adrian let out a ragged breath. He leaned down and captured her mouth. This kiss was different. It was slow, deep and possessive. He braced one hand against the doorframe beside her head, boxing her in. Lena's hands found their way under his jacket, feeling the hard muscle of his back through his shirt. She opened to him, inviting him in, wanting to lose herself in the sheer size of him. He tasted of mint and danger. He kissed her like he wanted to devour her, like he could breathe for her. The sound of a deadbolt sliding back made them freeze. The door to the apartment across the hall opened with a loud clatter. An elderly woman stepped out with a bag of trash. Adrian pulled back instantly, his body shielding Lena from view. He turned his head, his face shifting from passion to a blank, menacing mask in a split second as the woman took one look at Adrian, squeaked, and ducked back inside her apartment, slamming the door. The moment was broken. Reality rushed back in, the hallway, the neighbors, Diego sleeping 10 feet away. Adrian looked down at Lena. His chest was heaving. He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated and pained. "I should go," he said, his voice raspy, "before I do something that makes it impossible to leave." The peace did not last. 2 days later, Lena was at the grocery store. It was a mundane errand, one she insisted on doing herself despite Adrian's objections. She needed to feel normal. She needed to buy milk and bread without a security detail. She walked out to the parking lot, shifting the paper bag to her hip. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the asphalt. She unlocked her old sedan. As she opened the back door to put the groceries in, a gray van screeched to a halt behind her, blocking her in. The side door slid open. 3 men jumped out. They wore ski masks. Lena dropped the groceries. The glass jar of pasta sauce shattered on the pavement. "Grab her!" one of them shouted. Lena turned to run, but they were too fast. A hand grabbed her jacket, yanking her backward. She screamed, flailing, her nails raking against the mask of her attacker. "Get in the van!" She kicked out, landing a blow on a shin, but another man grabbed her other arm. They were dragging her toward the open maw of the vehicle. Suddenly, tires squealed, a high-pitched tearing sound. A black sedan roared around the corner of the aisle, jumping the concrete median. It slammed into the side of the gray van with a deafening crunch of metal. The impact threw the kidnappers off balance. Lena was torn from their grip and fell hard onto the asphalt, scraping her hands. The doors of the black sedan flew open. Adrian Viscari stepped out. He did not look like a businessman. He held a handgun with a practiced, terrifying ease. Behind him, Enzo and Luca emerged with shotguns. "Drop it," Adrian roared. The kidnappers hesitated. They looked at the crumpled side of their van, then at the 3 armed men advancing on them. "Go! Go!" the driver of the van screamed. The men scrambled back into the damaged vehicle. One of them raised a pistol, aiming in Lena's direction. Adrian didn't flinch. He fired 2 shots, precise. Controlled, they shattered the windshield of the van. The kidnappers panicked. The van reversed wildly, tires smoking, and sped off toward the exit, leaving a trail of broken glass. Adrian did not chase them. He turned and ran to where Lena was lying on the ground. He dropped the gun and fell to his knees, pulling her up. "Lena, are you hit? Look at me." Lena was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "No," she gasped. "No, I am okay. They grabbed me." Adrian pulled her into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe, burying his face in her neck. He was trembling. The man who had just fired a gun without blinking was shaking in her arms. "I have got you," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "I have got you. I will not let them take you." Sirens began to wail in the distance. Adrian pulled back, his hands gripping her shoulders. His eyes were wild, dark holes of fear and rage. "This ends now," he said. They did not go back to the apartment. Adrian drove her to a building in the city center, a spire of glass that pierced the clouds. He led her into a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse that spanned the entire top floor. It was a fortress in the sky, cold, modern, and impregnable. "You stay here," Adrian said. His voice was flat. "Brokering no argument. Enzo is bringing Diego. You do not leave this floor. Not for work, not for school, not for anything." Lena stood in the middle of the vast living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Greyport, the glittering lights, the dark water, the sprawling grid of streets where men were hunting her. She's a target. He had said it bluntly in the car. You are not just involved. Lena, you are the leverage. She walked to the balcony door and stepped out into the cold wind. The city looked beautiful from up here, like a sea of diamonds, but it felt overwhelming. The sheer scale of Adrian's world crashed down on her. The rival gangs, the gunshots in parking lots, the armies of men, the millions of dollars moving in the dark. It was a machine that chewed people up. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. A warm weight settled over her shoulders. Adrian had followed her out. He draped his suit jacket over her. He stood beside her. Looking out at the city, he ruled. He did not touch her, but his presence was a solid wall against the wind. It is too big, Lena whispered, the words snatched away by the breeze. What is? Adrian asked. All of this, she said, gesturing vaguely at the skyline. Your world. The danger. It is too big. Adrian, it is suffocating. Adrian turned to her. He placed his hands on the railing, boxing her in against the view. I know, he said quietly, but look at me. Lena looked up. His face was stark in the moonlight, the sharp angles softened by exhaustion. The world is big, he said, but I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Lena looked at him, really looked at him, in the chaos of the city below, amidst the violence and the fear. He was the only thing that wasn't moving. He was the anchor. She realized with a jolt of terror that she didn't want to run anymore. She wanted to stay on the balcony, inside the storm, as long as he was standing next to her. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Okay, she whispered. Adrian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He rested his chin on the top of her head, and for a moment, high above the danger, there was silence. Living in Adrian Vascari's penthouse was like living inside a diamond, cold, beautiful, and hard enough to cut you if you moved the wrong way. The apartment spanned the entire top floor of the spire, a fortress of glass and steel that looked down on the grimy streets of Greyport with indifferent arrogance. For Lena Cruz, it was a cage, albeit one lined with silk and stocked with expensive wine. She had been there for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of silence, security guards by the elevator, and the breathtaking view of a city she was no longer allowed to walk in. She spent her days exploring the geography of Adrian's private life. It was a strange, intimate invasion. She ran her fingers over the spines of his books, heavy volumes on history, philosophy, and architecture, their pages worn from reading. She found a pair of battered leather boxing gloves hanging in the back of a closet, the leather cracked and smelling of old sweat and rosin. On a mantel in the study, she found a framed black and white photograph of a stern-looking man who shared Adrian's sharp jawline and dark eyes. His father, the man who had built the empire Adrian was now fighting to keep. But it was the mornings that unraveled her. Adrian usually left before she woke, a ghost in a charcoal suit leaving behind only the scent of sandalwood. But on this particular Tuesday, the rhythm broke. Lena woke early, the gray light of dawn just beginning to bleed through the sheer curtains. She wandered out of the guest room, wearing one of Adrian's oversized white t-shirts that hung to her knees and a pair of sleep shorts. Her hair was a tangled mess, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She padded into the kitchen, expecting the sterile silence of the granite countertops. Instead, she found Adrian. He was standing by the espresso machine, his back to her. He was not wearing the armor of his suit. He wore gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips and a fitted black t-shirt that clung to the muscles of his back. He looked younger, softer, more human. The sound of her bare feet on the tile made him turn. He froze, a mug of steaming coffee in his hand. His eyes swept over her, taking in the messy hair, the oversized shirt that swallowed her frame, and the bare legs. Lena stopped, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She crossed her arms over her chest, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "I thought you had left," she murmured, her voice raspy with sleep. Adrian set the mug down on the counter. His gaze darkened, but not with anger. It was a look of profound, quiet hunger that made Lena's breath hitch. "I decided to work from home this morning," he said. His voice was rougher than usual, devoid of his professional polish. He turned back to the machine and pulled a second cup. He prepared it exactly the way she liked it, black with a splash of oat milk, without asking. He walked around the island and held it out to her. Lena reached for it. Her fingers brushed against his. Her hands were ice cold from the air conditioning. His were radiating a steady, dry heat. Adrian did not pull away. Instead, he wrapped his large hands around hers, trapping them against the warm ceramic of the mug. He rubbed his thumbs over her knuckles, bringing warmth back into her skin. "You are freezing," he noted softly. "It is the AC," Lena said, staring at their joined hands. His were so big, engulfing hers completely. The contrast made her feel small, fragile, and cherished. Adrian looked down at their hands, a faint, teasing smile touching his lips. "You have such small hands," he murmured. "It is ridiculous. They are normal-sized," Lena defended weakly, looking up at him. "You are just large." Adrian chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated in the quiet kitchen. He stepped closer, invading her personal space until her thighs bumped against his. He was not wearing shoes, and the loss of the inch or two of height made him feel more accessible. He leaned down. Lena held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. He did not kiss her lips. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her temple, inhaling the scent of her hair. "You fit here better than you think, Lena." He whispered against her skin. The words settled in her chest, warm and terrifying. For a moment, standing in the morning light with his hands warming hers, she allowed herself to imagine that this was real, that they were just two people making coffee, not a mob boss and the woman he had dragged into his war. The illusion of domestic peace shattered 3 days later. Lena was in the living room, reading one of his history books, when the phone in Adrian's study began to ring. It was the dedicated line, the one that never rang for good news. The door to the study was slightly ajar. Lena did not mean to eavesdrop, but the change in Adrian's voice was so abrupt it pulled her attention like a gunshot. "Are you sure?" Adrian asked. His voice was cold, flat, stripped of all the warmth she had felt in the kitchen. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Then we do not wait," Adrian said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Find them. Tonight. Take them out before they move again. I want the message to be clear. No survivors." Lena felt the blood drain from her face. The book slipped from her fingers and landed on the carpet with a soft thud. "Take them out. No survivors." He was ordering a massacre. He was speaking about ending human lives with the same casual tone he used to order dinner. Adrian hung up the phone. He walked out of the study, adjusting his cufflinks, his face a mask of grim determination. He stopped when he saw Lena standing there, her face pale, staring at him as if he were a stranger. He saw the fear in her eyes. He saw the realization. "Lena," he started, taking a step toward her. "Don't," she whispered, backing away. "Do not come near me." Adrian stopped. His hands fell to his sides. "You heard," he stated. "I heard you order people to be killed," Lena said, her voice trembling. "They are soldiers. Lena, they were planning to burn down one of my warehouses. People work inside those warehouses. So that makes it okay," she cried. "You just, execute them? It is a war," Adrian snapped, his patience fraying. "In a war, you strike first or you die. I am protecting what is mine, and that is all I am." "Isn't it?" Lena said, tears stinging her eyes. "Just something else you own, something else you have to kill for." "That is not true," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. That night, the distance between them was a canyon. Lena sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, staring at the locked door. She could hear Adrian pacing in the living room. She couldn't do this. She couldn't pretend that the blood didn't wash off his hands just because he touched her gently. She opened the door and walked out. Adrian was standing by the balcony doors, staring at his reflection in the dark glass. "I cannot do this." "Adrian," she said. He turned slowly. He looked exhausted, the weight of the crown heavy on his shoulders. "Do what?" he asked. I cannot be here. I cannot watch you become a monster. I have always been a monster. Lena, he said quietly, you just forgot for a while. No, Lena said, shaking her head. No, you are not. I have seen you. I have seen the way you are with Diego. I have seen the way you are with me. She took a breath, the words rising in her throat. Unstoppable. I cannot love someone who kills for a living. Adrian. The word hung in the air between them. Love. They both froze. Lena clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening. She hadn't meant to say it. She hadn't even admitted it to herself until that exact second. Adrian stared at her, his expression shattering. A mix of hope and agony crossed his face. You love me, he whispered. Lena let out a sob. Yes, God help me. Yes, and that is why I cannot stay. Because watching you do this, it destroys me. Adrian crossed the room in 3 long strides. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. You think I want this? He asked, his voice a broken whisper. You think I enjoy the blood? I was born into this, Lena. It is in my DNA. I have been trying to become something different. For you. Because when I look at you, I want to be the man you think I am. Then stop, she pleaded. Just stop. Walk away. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. It is not a job. Lena, you do not just put in your 2 weeks' notice. Walking away from this life is not like quitting. It is like amputating a limb. It is tearing out a part of yourself and hoping you survive the blood loss. If I walk away, the wolves come. For me, for my family, for you. The reality of his words crashed into her. The trap he was in was built of iron and blood, and there was no key. The fight went out of her, replaced by a terrifying, desperate need. I am so scared, she whispered, tears spilling over. I am terrified all the time. I am scared of you dying. I am scared of you disappearing. I am scared that one morning I will wake up and you will be arrested or shot in the street. Adrian let out a ragged breath. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. It was not a gentle hug. It was a desperate clutch, as if he were trying to merge their bodies into one. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, holding her so tight her ribs ached. Lena wrapped her arms around his waist, gripping his shirt, listening to the frantic rhythm of his heart beating against her chest. It was racing, just like hers. All of this. You, she stammered, her voice muffled against his shoulder. It is too much. It is too big. It hurts. She meant everything, the fear, the danger, the size of his world, the overwhelming magnitude of loving a man who stood with one foot in the grave. Adrian pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed, his lashes wet. I know, he rasped. His voice was low and raw. I know it hurts. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs stroking her wet cheeks. I promise you, Lena, I swear on my father's grave, I will never use this power against you, only for you. I would burn everything I have, every dollar, every building, every connection, before I let this life swallow you. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers. The moment was thick with emotion and a desire that bordered on pain. Lena wanted him. She wanted to forget the gunman and the phone calls and just exist in the circle of his arms. But Adrian pulled back. He exerted a terrifying amount of control. His jaw clenched tight. He refused to cross the line. He refused to take her while she was afraid, while she was vulnerable. Go to sleep. Lena, he whispered, kissing her forehead. I will keep watch. The breaking point arrived 2 days later, not with a bang, but with a white envelope. Diego had been allowed to go to his physical therapy appointment at the clinic. He was accompanied by Luca, one of Adrian's best men. But even the best men have blind spots. When Diego returned to the penthouse, he was pale. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't unbutton his coat. Diego? Lena asked, rushing to him. What happened? Are you hurt? Diego pulled a thick envelope out of his pocket and threw it on the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. A man approached me, Diego said, his voice hollow. In the lobby of the clinic, Luca was in the bathroom. It was just 10 seconds. Lena stared at the envelope. Who? He said his name was Nico, Diego whispered. He said he wanted to offer me a scholarship for my medical studies. Lena felt the room spin. Nico Moretti. He had gotten within touching distance of her brother. He said, Diego swallowed hard, looking up at Lena with eyes full of betrayal. He said that Adrian is bad news. Lena, he said that being near him is what puts a target on my back. He said this money is a down payment for us to leave town. Diego stood up, his voice rising. Is it true? Lena, is your boss a mobster? Is that where the money for my surgery came from? Lena couldn't lie, not anymore. Yes, she whispered. Diego recoiled as if she had slapped him. I am living on blood money. I did it for you, Lena cried. You were dying. Diego, I had no choice. There is always a choice, Diego shouted. And now, a man named Nico knows my name. He knows where I go to therapy. He said next time he won't bring cash. Diego sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. He is a monster. Lena, and you are working for him. Lena looked at the envelope. Nico Moretti wasn't trying to kill them. He was smarter than that. He was proving that Adrian couldn't protect them. He was proving that Adrian's very existence was the danger. She looked at her brother, terrified and broken. She realized then that love wasn't enough. Adrian could burn the world for her, but the smoke would still choke the people she cared about. She had to leave. She waited until Adrian left for a meeting with the Port Authority. I need to pack, she told herself, her hands trembling as she pulled her old suitcase out from under the bed in the guest room. She moved with frantic haste. She threw clothes into the bag indiscriminately. She found the emergency cash she had been squirreling away from her tips, $3,000. It wasn't much, but it was enough for 2 bus tickets to the Midwest and a month of rent in a cheap motel. We leave tonight, she texted Diego, who was in his room. Be ready. She was folding a sweater, her tears dripping onto the wool. When the front door beeped, Lena froze. It was 3 p.m. Adrian never came home at 3. She heard his heavy footsteps in the hallway. He didn't go to his study. He walked straight down the corridor toward the guest room. The door opened. Adrian stood there. He was still wearing his coat. He looked at the open suitcase on the bed. He looked at the stack of cash. He looked at Lena. His face didn't crumple. It turned into stone. The light in his eyes, the warmth that had been there during the coffee mornings, died instantly. You were going to run, he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Lena clutched the sweater to her chest. Adrian, Without a word, he interrupted. You were just going to vanish. I couldn't tell you, Lena whispered. You wouldn't have let me go. Try me, Adrian snarled. He stepped into the room, kicking the door shut behind him. The sound made Lena jump. Nico got to Diego, she said, her voice rising. He approached him at the clinic. He gave him money. He threatened him. Adrian's face twitched. I will kill him. That is the problem, Lena shouted, throwing the sweater into the suitcase. All you have is death. That is your only solution. I cannot drag my brother into this war. He's 19 years old. Adrian, he is terrified of you. And what about you? Adrian asked, stepping closer. Are you terrified of me? Yes, she admitted. I am terrified of loving you. Adrian stopped. He looked at the suitcase, then back at her. The betrayal in his eyes was a physical weight. I offered you everything, he said, his voice low and shaking with restrained emotion. I offered you protection. I offered you a home. I offered you me. You are asking me to accept a future built on blood, Lena said, tears streaming down her face. You are asking me to look at that view and ignore the bodies in the street. I can't do it. And you are asking me to be a man I am not, Adrian roared back. You are asking me to abandon everyone who depends on me. You want me to walk away? If I leave, my men die. Their families die. The city falls to animals like Nico Moretti. Is that what you want? I just want peace, Lena sobbed. There is no peace, Adrian yelled. There is only us. He grabbed the suitcase, his knuckles white. For a second, Lena thought he was going to throw it, thought he was going to stop her. Instead, he stared at it. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at Lena, and she saw something break inside him. "If the life I offer only hurts you," he said, his voice suddenly hoarse, "stripped of all its power, then I have no right to keep you." He let go of the suitcase. He stepped back, clearing the path to the door. "Go," he whispered. Lena stared at him. She wanted him to fight for her. She wanted him to beg. But he stood there, fists clenched at his sides, eyes shining with unshed tears, letting her walk out because he loved her too much to force her to stay. It broke her heart more than if he had held a gun to her head. "I am sorry," Lena whispered. She grabbed the handle of the suitcase. She walked past him. He smelled of rain and sandalwood, a scent she knew she would never forget. He didn't reach for her. He didn't look at her. He stared at the wall, his jaw locked tight. Lena walked down the hallway to Diego's room. "Get your bag," she said, her voice dead. "We are leaving." They walked to the elevator. The security guard looked confused but didn't stop them. Adrian must have given the order. The elevator doors slid open. Lena stepped inside, pulling her suitcase. She looked back one last time. Adrian was standing in the doorway of the penthouse. He looked like a king standing in the ruins of his castle. He looked lonely. He looked devastated. The doors began to slide shut. Lena didn't look away until the metal blocked him from view. As the elevator began its descent, gravity pulling her stomach down, she slid to the floor, buried her face in her hands, and wept. She felt like she was tearing out a part of herself and leaving it on the top floor of the spire. 3 weeks had passed since Lena Cruz walked out of the spire, dragging her suitcase and her heart behind her. Life in the new apartment was quiet. It was a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood on the northern edge of Grayport, far removed from the glittering skyline of the financial district and the shadowy docks where Adrian Viscari held court. The walls were painted a dull beige. The carpet was thin, and the view from the window was a brick wall of the adjacent building. It was safe. It was anonymous. It was exactly what she had asked for, and it felt like being dead. Lena worked the morning shift at a small bakery and cafe 3 blocks away. She wore a stained apron instead of silk dresses. She poured coffee for tired commuters who did not look at her twice. There were no bodyguards, no black SUVs, no hushed whispers of respect when she entered a room. There was just the silence and the phantom sensation of Adrian's hand on the small of her back. She missed him with a physical ache that woke her up in the middle of the night. She would reach across the empty mattress, her fingers searching for the warmth of his skin, only to find cold cotton sheets. She missed the scent of sandalwood and rain. She missed the way he looked at her, as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. Diego was doing better physically, but the light had gone out of his eyes. He spent his days studying in his room, flinching whenever a car backfired on the street. He knew they were hiding, and the shame of it sat heavy between them. On a Tuesday afternoon, Lena was wiping down the counter at the cafe when the television mounted in the corner broke into the local broadcast. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. Her face was grave. Reports of gunfire in the warehouse district have confirmed escalation in the ongoing gang violence plaguing Grayport. Police are urging citizens to avoid the waterfront. Sources suggest this is part of an internal power struggle within the Viscari organization. Lena froze, the rag motionless in her hand. Her chest tightened, a vice grip of panic squeezing her lungs. Internal power struggle. That meant betrayal. That meant Adrian was fighting a war on 2 fronts. Nico Moretti on the outside, and someone unknown on the inside. She stared at the screen, desperate for a glimpse of him, terrified of seeing his face on a memorial graphic. "Hey, Lena," her manager called out from the back. "Tables 4 and 5 need clearing." Lena blinked, snapping back to reality. She forced herself to turn away from the screen. She refused to search his name on her phone. If she did, if she saw the violence spelled out in headlines, she knew she would break. She would run back to him, and she could not do that. She had to keep Diego safe. The sun was setting when she walked home, casting long, orange shadows across the cracked sidewalks. The air was getting colder, promising a bitter winter. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs, her legs heavy. She fished her keys from her purse as she reached the landing. She stopped. The door to their apartment was unlocked. It was cracked open an inch, revealing a sliver of darkness inside. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She knew she had locked it. She checked it 3 times every morning. It was a habit born of fear, a scar from her time in Adrian's world. "Diego?" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no answer. Panic spiked, hot and sharp. She pushed the door open and rushed inside, dropping her purse. "Diego!" She skidded to a halt in the small living room. Diego was sitting at the wobbly kitchen table. He was pale, his eyes wide and terrified. He was not moving because a man in a dark leather jacket was standing behind him, a heavy hand resting on Diego's shoulder. Sitting in the only armchair in the room, looking as relaxed as if he were in a high-end lounge, was a man Lena recognized instantly from the descriptions Adrian had given her. He had slicked back hair and a smile that did not reach his cold, dead eyes. "Hello, Lena," the man said. "Nico Moretti." Lena took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Her instinct was to run, to scream, but the man behind Diego tightened his grip, and Diego winced. "I would not scream if I were you," Nico said pleasantly. "The walls here are very thin. We would not want to disturb the neighbors with a tragedy." "What do you want?" Lena whispered. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. "We left. We walked away. We have nothing to do with him anymore." Nico stood up. He was shorter than Adrian, stockier, but he carried himself with a cheap swagger that made her skin crawl. He walked around the room, picking up a framed photo of Lena and Diego from the mantel. "You walked away." "Yes," Nico mused. "That was very helpful of you. It made you much easier to find without Viscari's dogs guarding you." He set the photo down face down. "You see, Lena, Adrian is a sentimental man. He's trying to get out of the business. He's moving assets, closing accounts, preparing to hand over the keys to the kingdom. He thinks he can just retire." Nico turned to her, his smile widening. "But nature abhors a vacuum. If he steps down, someone has to step up. I intend for that someone to be me, but Adrian, he is stubborn. He's refusing to let go of certain territories I require." "What does that have to do with us?" Lena cried. "Everything," Nico said. "You are the lever. You are the only thing in this world that man cares about more than his pride." He nodded to the man holding Diego. "Bring the boy." "No!" Lena shouted, rushing forward. The man pulled Diego roughly from the chair. Diego stumbled, gasping. "Leave him alone. Take me," Lena pleaded, grabbing Nico's arm. Nico backhanded her. It was a casual, dismissive strike, but it knocked her to the floor. "You are both coming," Nico said, adjusting his cuff. "Adrian will need motivation to surrender quickly, and nothing motivates a man like family." The ride was a blur of terror. They were shoved into the back of a van with blacked-out windows. Lena sat on the floor, holding Diego's hand so tight her fingers went numb. "He's going to kill us," Diego whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Lena, he is going to kill us." "No, he is not," Lena whispered back, though she did not believe it herself. "Adrian will come." She said it without thinking. It was a reflex. Despite the breakup, despite the blood, despite the fear that had driven her away, the certainty sat in her gut like a stone. Adrian would come. For all his darkness, for all the violence she despised, he had never failed the people he claimed, and he had claimed her. The van stopped. The doors opened to the smell of salt water and rust. They were dragged out into a massive, cavernous warehouse. It was cold, lit by harsh halogen work lights that buzzed overhead. The space was filled with shipping crates stacked 2 stories high. Nico's men, there were at least a dozen of them, pushed Lena and Diego toward the center of the room, where 2 chairs sat waiting. "Zip ties," Nico ordered. They were bound to the chairs. Lena struggled, but the plastic bit into her wrists. She looked around, her mind racing. There were too many of them. They were armed. She closed her eyes and did the only thing she could do. She prayed. And she did not pray to God. She prayed to the man she had left standing in the elevator. Across the city, in the ruins of the Verona Club, Adrian Viscari stood over a table covered in maps. He looked like a man who had not slept in weeks. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face gaunt. Since Lena left, he had thrown himself into the dismantling of his empire with a reckless, self-destructive fury. The phone in his pocket buzzed. He ignored it. Marco, his second-in-command, burst into the room. His face was white. "Adrian," Marco gasped. "You need to answer the phone." Adrian looked up, his eyes cold. "What is it?" "It is Nico." Marco said, "Yeah, he found them." The world stopped. The ambient noise of the club, the traffic outside, the hum of the refrigerator, it all vanished into a ringing silence. Adrian did not move. He did not breathe. "Found who?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Lena and the brother," Marco said, looking down at his shoes. "There was a leak." "One of the new guys in logistics. He sold their address to Nico an hour ago." Adrian went very still. It was the stillness of a bomb the second before detonation. "Where?" Adrian asked. "An old cannery in the shipyard, Pier 42. Adrian turned and walked to the wall where the weapons cabinet was concealed behind a painting. He ripped the painting off the wall, frame shattering on the floor. "Get the car," Adrian said. "Adrian," Marco cautioned. Stepping forward, "It is a trap. You know it is a trap. He wants you to walk in there so he can take you out. We need a plan. We need to flank them." "I said get the car," Adrian roared. He spun around, grabbing Marco by the lapels of his jacket. The rage in his eyes was not human. It was the look of a wolf that had nothing left to lose. "If we do not leave with her, Marco, we do not leave at all. Do you understand?" Marco swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand, boss. Call everyone," Adrian ordered, shoving Marco toward the door. "Every man we have left, we burn it down. We burn it all down. In the warehouse." Time stretched like taffy. Nico was pacing in front of Lena, holding a gun loosely in his hand. He checked his watch every few minutes. "He's taking his time," Nico taunted. "Maybe I overestimated you, sweetheart. Maybe he decided the business was more important after all." "He's coming," Lena said. Her voice was steady, surprising even her. Nico laughed. It was a cruel sound that echoed off the metal roof. "Let us say he does come. Then what? He walks in here. He dies. You die. The boy dies. It is a tragedy. Really, a test of how big his love really is. Is it big enough to die for?" He leaned down, bringing his face close to hers. "You should have stayed gone. Lena, you came back into his orbit, and gravity kills. I did not come back." Lena spat. "You dragged me back. Because you are too weak to fight him man to man. You have to hide behind a waitress and a sick kid." Nico's face twisted. He raised the gun, pressing the cold barrel against her forehead. "You have a big mouth for a—" Crash! The metal loading bay doors at the far end of the warehouse exploded inward. A black SUV rammed through the corrugated steel, metal screeching and tearing like paper. The warehouse erupted into chaos. "Take cover," Nico screamed, diving behind a stack of crates. The SUV skidded to a halt in the center of the room, providing a shield. The doors flew open, flashbangs were thrown out. They detonated with blinding white light and deafening bangs that stunned the room. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, screaming as the noise washed over her. Then the gunfire started. It was deafening. Automatic weapons fire echoed off the steel walls, a cacophony of violence. "Adrian!" Lena screamed, though she could not hear her own voice. She saw movement through the smoke. Figures in tactical gear were pouring through the breach, moving with lethal precision. But one figure was not taking cover. One figure was moving straight down the center aisle, firing a handgun with terrifying accuracy. Adrian, he was moving toward her. He was not looking at the shooters on the catwalks. He was not looking at Nico. His eyes were locked on her and Diego. "Get them clear!" Adrian roared, his voice cutting through the noise. Bullets sparked off the concrete floor near Lena's feet. She struggled against the zip ties, panic clawing at her throat. "Diego! Get down!" she yelled, trying to shield her brother with her own body, though she was bound to the chair. A man rushed out from behind a crate to her left, raising a shotgun. Adrian saw him. He didn't break stride. He fired 2 shots, dropping the man instantly. He reached them. He didn't have a knife to cut the ties. He grabbed the back of Lena's chair and dragged it violently behind a heavy pallet of machinery. He did the same for Diego. "Marco!" Adrian shouted. "Get them out!" Marco appeared from the smoke, cutting Diego's bonds with a serrated knife. "Go," Adrian ordered, shoving Diego toward Marco. "Take him to the car." "What about Lena?" Diego screamed, looking back. "I have got her," Adrian yelled. "Go!" Marco dragged a protesting Diego toward the breach. Adrian turned to Lena. He sliced the zip ties on her wrists. The moment her hands were free, she grabbed him, burying her face in his coat. "You came!" She sobbed. "I told you." He gasped, his eyes wild, scanning the room for threats. "I told you I would never let them take you." A shot rang out from high above. Lena felt a sudden, searing heat tear across her upper arm. It felt like a bee sting, magnified 1,000 times. She cried out, clutching her arm. Blood began to seep through her fingers, hot and wet. Adrian heard her cry. He looked down and saw the blood. Something inside him snapped. The calculated tactical awareness vanished, replaced by a feral, terrifying protectiveness. He grabbed her, pulling her body flush against his. He turned his back to the shooters, curling himself around her like a human shield. He was growling, a low, animalistic sound in his throat. "Move!" he roared, pushing her forward, keeping his body between her and the guns. He fired blindly over his shoulder, suppressing the enemy, not caring if he hit anything, only caring that they kept their heads down long enough for him to get her out. They reached the SUV. He shoved her into the back seat and dove in on top of her as bullets pocked the side of the vehicle. "Drive!" Adrian screamed at the driver. The SUV peeled out, tires smoking, speeding back through the shattered doors and into the night. In the warehouse, the silence returned slowly. Nico Moretti stood up from behind his crate. He watched the taillights of the SUV disappear. He was smiling. He picked up his phone. "Did you see that?" Nico asked the person on the other end. He did not chase. He did not finish the fight. He ran. "Listen for a moment." "Exactly," Nico said. "He's weak. He's done. Now, initiate the second phase. We have allies inside his circle who are ready to make their move. This does not end until Adrian Vascari is in the ground." The hospital room was quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft snick of the needle as the doctor stitched Lena's arm. It was just a graze. The doctor had said 10 stitches. No permanent damage, but the blood was still dried on Lena's shirt. Adrian sat in the plastic chair beside the bed. He was still wearing his coat, though it was torn and stained with soot. He had not said a word since they arrived. He stared at the floor, his hands clasped between his knees, shaking uncontrollably. He looked hollowed out. The terrifying rage from the warehouse was gone, leaving behind a man who looked like he had survived a car crash. The doctor finished. "Keep it dry for 3 days," he said, sensing the tension. "I will leave you two alone." The door clicked shut. Lena looked at Adrian. She saw the guilt eating him alive. She saw the resolve forming in his eyes, the resolve to leave her again, to push her away to save her. "Adrian," she whispered. He didn't look up. "I am sorry," he rasped. His voice was wrecked. "I am so sorry. Lena, I thought if you left, you would be safe. I was wrong." He looked up then. His eyes were haunted. "It ends now," he said. "I am done. I am dissolving the organization. I am giving Nico what he wants. I do not care about the money. I do not care about the territory. I just want you to live." He stood up, as if to leave, as if to walk out of the room and out of her life forever. Lena reached out with her uninjured arm. "Wait." She grabbed his hand. His fingers were cold, calloused, and trembling. Adrian stopped. He looked at their joined hands, then at her face. "You almost died," he whispered. "Because of me." "I almost died because I left," Lena said softly. She pulled on his hand, urging him closer. He resisted for a second, then crumbled. He sank onto the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her injured arm. "I tried to live without you, Adrian," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I tried to have the safe life, the quiet life, and I was miserable. I was a ghost." She intertwined her fingers with his. "Leaving you hurt more than staying ever did," she admitted. The confession hung in the air. Adrian let out a sound that was half sob, half sigh. He leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. He closed his eyes, breathing in her scent, verifying that she was alive, that she was warm. "You are everything," he whispered into the space between them. "You are the only thing that is real." He opened his eyes. They were dark, fierce, and filled with a promise that terrified and thrilled her. "I will fix this," he vowed. "I will burn my world to the ground if that is what it takes to keep you safe. I will destroy it all, the club, the business, the legacy. I will turn it all to ash." He kissed her, not with passion, but with a desperate, tender reverence. "And then," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "we will go somewhere where the shadows cannot find us." Lena looked at him, seeing the man beneath the monster, the protector beneath the killer. She knew the road ahead would be bloody. She knew Nico was not done. She knew the betrayal from inside his ranks was a ticking clock. But as she held his hand in the quiet hospital room, she knew one other thing. She was never walking away from him again. The main hall of Verona was silent. The jazz band was gone. The crystal glasses were shattered, and the amber lights that had once bathed the room in gold were dark. The only illumination came from the streetlights filtering through the boarded-up windows, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. Adrian Vascari stood in the center of the ruin. He wore a heavy wool coat, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Around him stood 6 men, the only ones left who mattered: Marco, Enzo, Luca, and 3 others whose loyalty had been tested by fire. "It is done," Adrian said. His voice did not echo. The heavy velvet curtains seemed to absorb the sound, burying it. Marco shifted his weight, looking at the floor. He looked aged, tired. "So we fight?" Marco asked. "We hit Nico tonight?" "No," Adrian said. "We do not fight, we dissolve." A ripple of shock went through the men. Enzo stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Boss," Enzo said, "if we dissolve, Nico takes everything. He takes the port, he takes the routes, he wins. Let him have the territory." Adrian said calmly, "He will not keep it for long." Adrian reached into his coat and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the dusty bar top. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "That contains 5 years of ledgers," Adrian explained. "Every bribe Nico paid to the city council, every shipment of illegal firearms, every name, every date, every bank account." Marco stared at the envelope. His face went pale. "You are giving him to the feds?" Marco whispered. "Adrian, that makes you—" "A rat?" Adrian finished the sentence. "A traitor?" "Yes." He looked around the circle of men. "If I fight Nico in the street, this war lasts another 10 years. More of you die. My family dies. But if I give this to the contact I have at the Bureau, Nico Moretti ceases to exist by sunrise tomorrow. The RICO charges alone will bury him for 3 lifetimes. But you can never come back," Luca said quietly. "Once you do this, the underworld will mark you. You will be a dead man walking." Adrian looked at the empty stage where he used to watch Lena work. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That is the point. Luca, Adrian Vascari has to die so I can finally live." The argument with Lena was not in a boardroom, but in the small, cramped kitchen of the safe house apartment. "You are not doing this alone," Lena said. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were dry and fierce. Adrian paced the length of the linoleum floor. He looked like a caged tiger. "You do not understand what I am about to do. Lena, I am burning the bridge while I am still standing on it. I am becoming a pariah. I do not care about your reputation among thieves," Lena shouted. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop pacing. "Stop trying to protect me by keeping me in the dark. If you want a life with me, a real life, it cannot be half shadow and half light. It has to be all in." Adrian looked down at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own. "I am scared," he admitted. The confession was barely a whisper. "I am scared that when I strip all of this away, when I am not the boss, when I am not the man who commands fear, I will not be enough." Lena softened. She stepped into his space, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You think I fell in love with the boss?" she asked. "I fell in love with the man who bandaged my hand. I fell in love with the man who makes coffee in the morning." She looked up at him. her expression intense. "We do this together, Adrian, or we do not do it at all." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then, he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, holding her as if she were the only anchor in a storm-tossed sea. "Okay," he breathed. "I choose you. Over everything else. I choose you." That night. The air in the bedroom was heavy, charged with a current that ran deeper than desire. They lay side by side on the narrow bed, fully clothed. The room was dark, save for the moonlight slicing through the blinds. Lena rested her head on Adrian's shoulder. His arm was wrapped around her, his hand resting flat on her back, feeling the rise and fall of her breathing. It wasn't sexual. It was something far more terrifying. It was intimate. Lena traced a slow circle on the fabric of his shirt, right over his heart. "What happens next?" she whispered. Adrian stared at the ceiling. "I drop the package. The dominoes fall. And then I disappear." Lena shivered. She pressed herself closer to him. "I am terrified." She admitted. "Of Nico? No," she said. "Of the quiet. I have spent my whole life fighting to survive. First the debt, then Diego's sickness, then you. I do not know who I am without the struggle." Adrian turned his head, his cheek brushing against her hair. "I know," he murmured. "My biggest fear is that once I am stripped of everything, the money, the power, the soldiers, I won't be big enough for you. I won't be able to protect you." Lena turned on her side to face him. Their noses almost touched, in the darkness. His eyes were pools of vulnerability she had never seen before. She reached up and pressed her forehead against his. "It isn't your power I need. Adrian," she whispered, "it is the size of the life we are trying to build. That is what scares me. It is so big. The hope is so big." Adrian moved his hand to cup the back of her neck. His thumb stroked the soft skin there. "We will grow into it," he promised. "We will take it one day at a time." The end of Adrian Vascari came on a Tuesday. It was a cold, rainy night on the outskirts of Greyport. A black sedan was parked on a lonely stretch of highway near the cliffs. Inside, the incriminating files had already been couriered to a federal agent who had been trying to catch Nico Moretti for a decade. Adrian stood by the guardrail, looking down at the churning black water below. Marco stood beside him. "The car is rigged," Marco said. His voice was thick with emotion. "The DNA evidence is planted. Dental records are swapped in the database. As far as the world is concerned, you are inside." Adrian nodded. He looked at the man who had been his right hand for 10 years. "Thank you, Marco, for everything." Marco gripped Adrian's hand. "Go, before I change my mind and chain you to the radiator." Adrian turned and walked away into the darkness, disappearing into the tree line where a nondescript truck was waiting. 10 minutes later, a massive explosion tore through the night. The fireball rose high into the rain, illuminating the cliffs in a stark, violent orange. The next morning, the news was everywhere. Mafia kingpin dead in car bombing. The headlines screamed, Vascari crime family leader killed in apparent gang hit in the safe house. Lena sat on the sofa with Diego. The television was blaring the report. They showed footage of the burning wreckage. Lena put a hand over her mouth. She let out a sob. Diego put his arm around her. "Lena," he said gently, "I'm so sorry." Lena leaned into her brother, hiding her face. Her shoulders shook. To Diego, it looked like grief. To the world, it looked like a woman mourning her lover. But inside, Lena was shaking with adrenaline. She was shaking because she knew he was not in that car. She was shaking because the monster was dead, and the man was waiting for her. She spent one last night in Greyport. She walked through the streets where she had been a waitress, where she had been a debtor, where she had been a target. She looked at the skyline of the spire one last time. Goodbye, she whispered to the city that had almost broken her. 3 weeks later, the bus ride had taken 2 days, then a train, then a taxi that drove them down a winding road lined with pines and salt spray. The town was small, a cluster of white houses clinging to the edge of the Atlantic coast, several states away from Greyport. The air here smelled clean, It smelled of brine and pine needles, not exhaust and gunpowder. The taxi stopped in front of a small, weathered cottage with a porch that looked out over the water. "This is it?" Diego asked, grabbing his backpack. "This is it," Lena said. She stepped out of the taxi. Her heart was beating so hard she felt dizzy. She paid the driver and stood at the bottom of the gravel path. The front door of the cottage opened. A man stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing jeans and a gray flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair was a little longer. Unstyled by expensive products, he looked rougher. He looked real. Adrian, he did not move. He stood there, gripping the railing, waiting for her. There was no dramatic music. There were no slow-motion cameras. There was just the sound of the waves and the wind in the trees. Lena dropped her bag. She ran. She sprinted up the gravel path, her boots crunching on the stones. Adrian moved then. He came down the steps 2 at a time. They met in the middle of the yard. Lena launched herself at him. Adrian caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist. Lifting her feet off the ground, he buried his face in her neck, letting out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You are here," he whispered into her skin. "You are really here." "I told you," she choked out, gripping his shoulders. "I told you I would come." He set her down but did not let her go. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. His eyes were clear. The shadows were gone. Diego walked up the path, dragging his bag. He looked at Adrian, then at Lena. For the first time in months, he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "Nice place." "Adrian," Diego said. "Welcome home." "Diego," Adrian said, extending a hand. The living room of the cottage was small. Sunlight streamed in through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was a humble space. A worn sofa, a small table, a rug that had seen better days. It was a far cry from the penthouse at the spire, but to Lena, it looked like a palace. It was evening. Diego had gone down to the shore to explore. Lena and Adrian stood in the center of the room. Adrian reached into the pocket of his jeans. He pulled out a small velvet box. "My hands are shaking," he said with a self-deprecating laugh, holding them up. "Look at that. I used to hold a gun steadier than this." Lena's breath hitched. She watched him. "I got a job," he said, "at the marina down the road, fixing diesel engines. It is hard work. Grease and oil. The pay is, well, it is not what I'm used to." He opened the box. Inside sat a ring. It was simple. A thin gold band with a modest diamond. It was not a rock that could sink a ship. It was delicate. "I bought this with my first paycheck," Adrian said softly. "It is clean money. Lena, every cent." He looked at her, his expression turning serious. "I want a life where my greatest risk is loving you too much," he said. "I want to build something that stands on solid ground." He took the ring from the box. He took her left hand. Lena felt the tears spilling over her cheeks. She looked at the ring, then at him, then at the sunlit room, the magnitude of it all, the death of their old lives, the survival, the sheer improbability of this moment crashed into her. She laughed through her tears, a wet, joyful sound. When he slid the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly. But the emotion in her chest expanded, pressing against her ribs until she thought she might burst. "It is too big. It hurts," she whispered, her voice cracking. She didn't mean the ring. She meant the promise. She meant the future. She meant the enormity of loving a man who had burned down his kingdom just to stand in a cottage with her. Adrian froze for a second, the echo of the title hanging in the air. Then his eyes softened. The corners of his mouth lifted in a tender, knowing smile. He stepped closer, closing the last inch of distance between them. He raised his hands and cupped her face, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears that streaked her cheeks. "You will get used to me," he whispered. He reclaimed the line. It was no longer a threat from a dangerous stranger. It was a vow, a promise that she had a lifetime to adjust to the size of this love. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It was a slow, lingering kiss, tasting of salt and sunlight and peace. Epilogue. The months turned into a year. Life in the coastal town was slow. Lena went back to nursing school, her tuition paid for by shifts at the local clinic. Diego thrived in the sea air, his health returning with the tides. He laughed more now, his shadow no longer haunting him. Adrian came home every evening with grease under his fingernails and the smell of the ocean on his skin. His hands, once smooth and lethal, grew rough with honest labor. He was tired, but it was a good tired. The kind that let him sleep without a gun under his pillow. One summer evening, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and fire. Lena and Adrian sat on the porch swing. Their shoulders were touching, their fingers were intertwined, resting on his knee. The danger of Greyport felt like a story from another lifetime. The name Vescari was a ghost. Buried in a police file somewhere in a dusty basement, here, he was just Adrian. Lena rested her head on his shoulder. He squeezed her hand, the one with the simple gold band. The intensity between them had not faded. It had just changed. It was no longer the frantic, desperate heat of survival. It was a steady burn, a lighthouse beam cutting through the dark. She leaned into him, closing her eyes, listening to the rhythm of his breathing and the crash of the waves. She was no longer running. She had finally accepted the truth she had learned in the warehouse and in the penthouse and in the quiet of this porch. Some loves are so big they hurt when you first try to hold them. They stretch you. They break you open. But if you are brave enough to stay, you grow. You grow big enough to hold the love, and eventually, it doesn't hurt anymore. It just feels like home. Thank you so much for listening to the final part of It's Too Big, It Hurts. I hope you enjoyed Lena and Adrian's journey from darkness into the light. It has been an emotional ride, and I am so grateful you stuck with us until the very end. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment down below with your country, and let me know what you thought of the ending. Did Adrian redeem himself? Was the ending what you hoped for? If you enjoyed this story, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button for Mafia Romance Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a new series. We have so many more passionate, intense stories coming your way. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next story.